The topic of today's discussion will be the A3 define phase. What we want to do here is just highlight the alignment between the define phase of the make and the traditional layout of the A3. To do this, we also want to consider the purpose of the define and look at how that is reflected on the A3. And the third element to this, we will be looking at the process that we can use to complete the A3. And this relates to the questions, tools, and learning that we derived from using the A3. The define relates to two aspects of the A3, the background and the current condition. The latter, the current condition, overlaps with the next make phase measure. As a consequence, there is going to be interaction in the countermeasure step between the define and the measure. We need this to ensure that we have the correct data sets available to allow us to use the tools to answer the questions to derive the knowledge that we require. So if we look at the purpose of the define phase of the make, it's to define the challenge or the improvement opportunity. To do this on array 3, we'll need to look at three elements. We will need to look at the audience. So who is the customer? Who will benefit from what we're trying to achieve? We will need then to look at the core processes. Where is the problems occurring and where do we look to try and expose those problems? And then we have to consider who will deliver the improvement. What team will actually work and focus on the customer's concerns and dealing with those to drive improvement? So let's consider the customer. So where do we expect to see references to the customer in our A3? Well, they might occur in the project title. They might occur in the process that we're actually referring to. And we would expect possibly to see them in the background. If they're not reflected in these areas, then we haven't had the discussion about who the customer is. And as a consequence of that, our A3 may be already going off a course. The next one we need to think about then is the core business process. And where would we expect to see a reference to this? Again, we should see it in the title, we should see it in the process area, and we should see it being investigated in the current condition. Again, if we are not doing this, if they're not evident, if we're not referring to a core process or processes, then we are not focused and have not got the right scope on what we're trying to achieve and where we're trying to achieve it. The third element, the team, we will expect to see in two places. We will expect to see reference to the team leader and to the team members. The important factor here is not only is that there is a leader and a team, but the composition of the team needs to be considered, because if we have the right team with the right knowledge, with the right focus, then they can achieve the results much easier. So now let's just think about the first element of array 3, the background. And when we're talking about the background, we're operating within the threshold of knowledge. How do we define the threshold of knowledge? It's generally considered as referring to that boundary between we know for sure and we don't know. Now, most of us might think of that as being black and white, but that's not the case. And strictly speaking, we only say we know when we have specific and relevant information to back that up. However, that's not what we always do. We always make assumptions. We always think into the space where we don't know the facts and jump to conclusions. And it's important that we think about that and we think about how that works. The background may focus on what we know, what we believe we know and can prove. So let's look at the elements of that. So let's look at the process we would use to complete the background. The first element of that is the questions. Here we've outlined some sample questions. How did the problem surface? Is there historical context? What is currently wrong? In reality, you will need to identify the critical questions that apply to your problem. And my advice is to do this with the help of your mentor. The second part of it is the tools. What tools can we actually bring into play to allow us to actually answer some of the questions that will arise? And typically in this area, some of the sample tools that we actually see are the trend or run chart, the histogram. We need to think about putting together that problem statement that is going to drive what we do and how we do it. Now, different tools will be available in different organizations to actually augment and improve how you answer the questions relevant to that area. The key thing of all the phases is the learning. And just a sample here of what we need to get as a minimum out of this is we need to get a good problem statement. And we need to get a good realization of the magnitude of the problem. And this is stuff that we based on what we know and what we can prove. And what we actually reflect in our A3 and what's added to the A3 is what we learn and how you know it's true. And if we follow this rule, this will help us to keep our A3 concise and to the point. The key note here in terms of your A3 at all phases of the A3 is to keep it relevant and simple. The next part of the A3 that relates to define is the current condition. Investigating the theater problem means that we have to look at the width, and we can think about this as the deviation from the standard. So we have to ask ourselves questions in relation to this. What is the gap between the performance and the standard? Is there a NESIS process that we can actually see, go look at, or map? What is the nature of the problem? So is it a situation that it's a process out of control and we got to get it back to standard? Or is it a situation where we have to develop a new standard and hence a new process? There's also our problems are going to have depth. So we are going to have to be looking for the point of causality. Critical to this then is picking the right tools. Some of the tools we can use here is the control chart, is the process mapping, is the Pareto chart, to actually understand what is actually happening. And what we want to, things we're trying to do here is we're trying to learn and select the part that we're going to take to improve the problem. So we need to actually know the issues in the performance gap, the critical problem areas, and we need to start prioritizing the problems to be addressed, the course we are going to take to actually resolve that. Again, in the context of this, what's added to the A3 is what you learned and how you know it's true. That concludes this session. Just remember that the A3 is a living document to help you become a master problem solver. As such, it may need to be revised. Where this is necessary, it should be done with the help of your mentor and with the permission of your sponsor. I wish you all the best in your implementation of A3. Thank you very much.